prefer that I send it, the email?
No, it's fine.
Okay. All right, so we're starting. Okay. Yeah. I'll pass it over to you while you're in the middle of something. You're okay, well, you're more charismatic.
Yeah, right. All right, it is time to start our second session of NetMod. Lou Berger,
Kent Watson.
and Joel, I think, will be joining us on Jabber, although it doesn't look like he's there yet. Our last session was a little bit rushed, and because of it being a joint session with NetConf, or a follow-on with NetConf, we did run out of time to really finish the discussion. We mentioned in that session that the design team, the versioning design team, has a session set up for tomorrow. And Rob Wilton just came over and said that they'll be sending out the information to the list. So if you're interested in participating in follow-on discussions, please feel free to go there. It's not a formal working group meeting, but it is with the members of the design team that are here. There should be good discussions, and the action from that will be to send any updates, send any conclusions from there to the list for follow-on discussion. So if you're interested, please come. Whoops. So for some reason, it feels like we're late in the week, but we're really not. We're still Monday. So some may not have seen the note well yet. This is the standard reminder that what you say here is considered an IETF contribution, and that it's governed by our rules. And if you're interested, either go to that link at the bottom of the page, or please see BCP 79. But basically, anything that you say here becomes part of our public record. As usual, we have audio, video, streaming, and recording. If when you come to the mic, please make sure you state your name. And if you would like to help out with our interactive minute-taking, note-taking, please feel free to jump onto Etherpad and contribute there. We are in our second session. You've found your way here, so you don't really need this information. One thing that we wanted to point out is Friday is canceled. So this is our last session here. There are no agenda changes, so this is the agenda that was published. Excuse me. So we have two RFCs that have been published since the last meeting. The first one I think is worth noting because that was in the working group a long time. So having that published is a really nice accomplishment, and we appreciate all those who contributed to it. And schema mount was another one that took a little while to get done and took a lot of hard work, and we appreciate that being everyone who contributed to get us there. So thank you. We have two. Oh, okay, so we can't. Okay. There were stickers or something I was supposed to give out, right? I have to go see if I have those old IPv6 stickers. We have two that have been submitted for publication. One on the queue. One is waiting for write-up. I see our AD nodding his head, so he knows it's there, and I assume that'll be coming soon. So we have a number of working group documents on the agenda. We're going to talk about those more in a moment. Not on the agenda are these two documents that are listed. Basically, a few weeks ago, the authors said that they think it's ready for last call. At the last meeting, we talked about it being close. We felt it was a little too close to try to do the last call right before the IETF. So we're planning to start this next week. Last call on these two documents. There is one other document that's not on the agenda, and we received an update from Yingzhen. Does one of the authors want to come up and talk to this slide, or?
So we didn't have a chance to do an update before this IETF, and we have a couple of open issues, and I will discuss with the people who send the comments during this IETF, and we'll post an update right after the meeting.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
I think that's the last one of our intro slides, and off. Before we go to Balazs, we wanted to have Robert speak for a moment on a change that's happened inside the general IETF and specifically related to Yang catalog. So Robert is the project manager for the IETF for Yang catalog, so he can just give us an update what's happening there.
So hopefully everyone is familiar with Yang catalog, a set of tools that's gathering Yang modules from many SDOs and implementation communities and tools to develop new Yang modules. The operation of yangcatalog.org is moving to the IETF Secretariat. We have a project underway that is moving the machine to a Secretariat managed machine and adding a few features, such as bringing in the yangvalidator.com functionality and continuing to work on the enhancements and bugs that the community identifies. If you go to yangcatalog.org, there's a list of the various GitHub projects that make up the whole project. And you can see the issues that are being worked there. So
great. Thank you very much. If anyone has any questions, they can find Robert at a break, or Benoit, who's really instrumental in bringing this thing all about, can also provide information. All right, thank you very much. Appreciate you coming by.
Welcome back to NetMod.
You have to get close.
I'm Balazs Zangyel from Ericsson, speaking about Yang instance data format. This has been an ongoing draft for some time, and we had some new changes. So the concept is largely the same. We need Yang-defined data, sometimes offline, not just from RESTconf and NetConf, but in a file format or some other format. These are some of the use cases, not all of them, that we need support for this. Documenting server capabilities would be if you remember from NetConf, the Yang push notification capabilities, that wants to use this already. And I'm trying to define a standard file format. This draft is only about the file format, not the use cases are only mentioned as the reason why we do this. And the file format really means defining metadata for the instance data set, naming it, giving it a revision date or something like that, description, and then defining the XML and JSON encoding for it. So what changed? We had actually two revision changes for the draft. First of all, we have the concept of target Yang modules. So these are the Yang modules for which we are defining the Yang data. And there are three methods now to define which modules we define the data for. It's not just the modules, actually. It's the modules, which revision date of that module, which supported features, and which deviations, because all can affect whether the instance data is usable or not. One method would be to put it inline, which means that it's in the same XML or JSON data structure as the data itself, contained in the same file. Another is, if you think about the use case where providing diagnostic information every 5 minutes in a file, you don't want to repeat it and repeat it and repeat it. What are the target modules? Then you just use a URI that points out another file which will contain this information. And in this repetitive files, you only have to have the URI. And in some cases, you just can say it's externally defined, whatever is the context, some method, you know what files you are using or what Yang models you are using. This was redefined to Yang choice, so it's easy to add new methods if we want. For example, a package-based method if we accept Robert's proposal about Yang packages. Previously, I proposed a dedicated file extension, this YED, Yang instance data, but as we really have JSON data or XML data, so this file extension was removed from the proposal. Another big comment was that earlier the draft referred to the real data, the content data we are delivering is the same thing as we would have as a response for a get or a get operation or get request. And some people objected that we should not use that. We should reference the various RFCs that, and sometimes drafts that define what kind of data we get back. So now we have reference to the Yang RFC, to the RESTconf RFC, to metadata RFC, at least these ones. Also, connected to the Samware work, it was raised that there might be additional data connected to the Yang library that would be useful for identifying the target modules. For example, if we ever introduce the Samware version or some other version number, that will help also identifying the target modules. So the target pointer, which is actually a bit of a data structure inside the choice, allows you to add, yes, this is the base file that will tell you the module name, revision, etc. But I also support an augmenting module that would add semantic versioning or something other useful. Probably it will not be used for some time, so it's a possibility, not a necessary complication. Then I got one comment that it's not all IETF Yang library serves our purpose that it defines module name, revision, features and deviations, but maybe I would like to use some other Yang module to define the same data. So now it's possible to use some other Yang module for that. Also, earlier, the part that defined the target Yang modules was mixed up in the content data with the real data that I want to provide. It was commented that's not a clean solution, so it was moved out into a separate JSON or a separate XML part. And one last thing, that backwards compatibility was mentioned with all this speak about Yang versioning. Is Yang versioning at all applicable to instance data files? It is not defined, and it would be extremely hard or impossible to define what backwards compatibility means for instance data sets. Because instance data sets allow you to have partial data sets, so you don't, if you remove something, yeah, it might still be okay. So that's, for that reason, semantic versioning, for example, doesn't apply to it. There are a few considerations about backwards compatibility. So if you are documenting some list data, you should not change the key value if this meaning is still the same, or you should not reuse a key value for something that has not changed. And this is just an example how this looks like. So we still have the instance data set, name for it, some other additional metadata, which is not everything is listed here. And then we have this inline target spec, which says that target Yang modules are defined inside the same data set, inside the same file. And then we have the target module separated out from the content data to tell you that this instance data set contains data about IETF NetConf ACM. Revision date, which is not mandatory anymore. In some cases, it's better to add a timestamp if, let's say, it's a file that's produced every 5 minutes. On the other hand, if this instance data file is something that's produced by human design activity, then the revision date is still the or the date is still the good thing to use. And then this would be the content part, just couldn't fit it on the same page. So this is for access control, a common example that provides some default access control rules. And the way forward, we have seen a lot of comments to the previous versions. For this one, I have not really seen much. I think I managed to include all the comments because, yeah, thank you for your good comments. They were good. And I would like to ask, when can we go to the last call with this? That's the last one.
Hey, first off, are there any comments before we?
Jürgen Schönwelder. It's a terminology issue. So when you say target pointer, for me, it's really a schema pointer. And your target modules are really schema modules. So I find it confusing that you use a slightly different terminology.
You raised that question that the word target might not be the best for this. So saying that modules for which we are defining data. I would really appreciate if someone could come up with a better word for it. I don't want a full sentence there. But I agree with you that it's I would say it's not bad, but it's not the best.
Rob Wilton, Cisco, I agree with Jürgen, actually. I think that schema is a better definition for that. One other comment, I think I've looked at the latest version. In the inline schema definition, I think you're still hard-coded to Yang library as the base. Is that right?
No.
Maybe I might. I'll check the latest version. Okay.
Personally, I think it would be acceptable, but as some people wanted it, no, it's not mandatory to use the Yang library. What is mandatory that the first module that you use in these target Yang modules must be able to specify name, revision, features, and deviations, because these four are clearly needed.
Okay.
So first, Kent, as a contributor, I did send an email this morning, review comments on this draft, which we could take potentially as last call comments if it were to be taken into last call, but I do think it needs some work still. Naming, is part of it, and also perhaps some structure type related issues.
Sorry, I haven't seen them as yet.
Okay,
So.
that's fine. Any other comments? Could I get a sense from the room? How many people have read this draft? Raise your hand, please.
Read this version.
This version of the draft, yes. So it's a few. Oh, and I did it wrong. Yeah.
I think it would be good if we had a little more opportunity, a little more comments on the list. So please take a look at it and see if you like the version, let us know. If you have comments on it, send it. And after we see some more review comments, we can gauge where we are on last call. So it's really important to comment on this version, because that'll help guide us towards whether you think, whether we move towards last call. But I right now, it seems like we don't have enough feedback on the latest version.
It was published before the IETF, and not that much before the IETF, so people were probably busy with other drafts.
Exactly. Should be loaded. Ken, we're actually jumping. Ken, you're actually jumping over someone.
Oh, am I?
It is data structure.
Oh.
You're right. Yeah, you're right, Martin.
I thought it was just.
I guess I shouldn't listen to my co-chair sometimes.
I was coming down to him. Sorry.
Okay, Martin Björklund presenting the data extension draft. It actually, in the last IETF, I'll go to the next slide. In the last IETF, I think it was decided to, and then on the list, to move to a new keyword, not Yang data, but instead structure. So the module is now called IETF Yang structure extensions, and the statements are structure and augment structure. So those are the two extensions that we define. And here's just a simple example of a structure that could be defined, one from the subscription draft. Another change that we did was that a structure is now encoded like an any data or like a container. So the name of the structure is going to be the top level element in XML, or the top level, I don't know, object name in JSON. And then everything within the structure is just encoded as usual within that element. So we believe that this draft is more or less ready for working group last call. We did recognize that we need an example of, so one thing with the structure is that it can be used, if I go back to this previous slide, the structure defines something that is not part of any data store or anything, and it doesn't say where it's used. It can be used as a top level thing in an instance document or a protocol data unit, or as in this example, it can be used inline in something else, like in netconf error info. You could put anything in there. For example, you could put a structure in there. So we need to add an example of that, probably the example we just saw. So we want to do that, and then we believe that the draft is ready for working with last call. But now we are also working on this Yang next thing. So a bigger question is, should we continue with this as extensions, or should we try to fold it into the Yang 102 or Yang next work instead? I guess that's a question for the working group.
So given the past sort of cycle time for Yang revision, and where we are now, we're probably talking, 2 years from now before we would have that 1.2. If we're lucky, 18 months. And I think that's really aggressive. So the question is do you want to wait that long for this, or make it an extension and gain experience with it that then can be incorporated into 1.2? And so I think it'd be useful to hear from the authors on it, and then from the working group on that.
Yeah, so this is it's based on the experience of Yang data that we already have. So this is like the second iteration of this. So the question is, should we then also do a third iteration directly? But maybe it's, it might be okay. This is, the document's almost ready, so we can publish it.
Okay, so just to be clear, you're saying there's no reason to wait. Let's go forward with it and gain more experience. Looks like we have a few. Well, I think Kent was in line as contributor first, and then we'll go to that. Is that
Well, no, I think it's more of a chair comment. It's really the dependency for this document. I think the zero touch document is no longer having dependency on this. It moved ahead with the RESTconf Yang data approach. I think the only current remaining dependency is for the Yang push messages document.
Instance data, actually.
Okay, so that one would be, so there's a reason why we want to move forward more quickly.
Those are good points.
Yes, okay, yeah, so it's the dependency that we're trying to resolve.
Just that if you wait for Yang 1.2, I'll probably try to avoid it altogether in instance data. So I would like to have it now.
Anjalotka, I have one question. So now that we have this top level element part of the data, does it also mean that it introduces a schema node in Yang?
No. It's just a matter of encoding.
Okay, so it means that you still need the augment structure.
Yes, so we still have the augment structure. So, if we were to do this in proper Yang, we would probably skip the augment structure and just say that it's a schema node and use normal augment.
Yeah, because this is what's done for RPCs that are a similar structure, basically, right? Yes. So I would be really in favor of doing this if we And I have the question regarding the instance data. So would it be a real problem if Balázs's draft doesn't use this at all? Because I think that it's just a separate Yang module, so there's no interaction with other Yang defined stuff. So I think, and in a way, somebody can also set up a netconf server keeping this kind of data like Yang catalog does, something similar. So I really don't see any reason for using this extension in that particular document. It's something else for the error information, for example, but not in that case. So I think we could simply not use it in those cases, and Balázs could just push it.
So I think we've had this discussion before, and
we had it, but
we need a statement. I mean, the alternative for Balázs would be to use RESTconf Yang data.
I have some problem with the first sentence in the introduction that we need a standard mechanism for defining. I think we do have this mechanism. It's called Yang, and as long as it's usable, I would suggest to use just Yang without this. If I may suggest, maybe some more reasoning would be useful in the introduction to really see the motivation, because in cases like the instance data draft, I don't see it. I don't see any benefit of using this, except of a number of complications and delay for the other draft.
Sorry, Kent as chair. So I do believe Balázs's draft could use the RESTconf Yang data, just like the Zero Touch draft did, but it would not be possible for the notification messages draft, because that one needs the augment facility.
Right, and also potentially Balázs's draft would, not his draft itself, but other ones might want to augment, the instance data format.
Okay.
Going forward.
But I didn't mean to use the RESTconf mechanism just to avoid any encapsulation.
Yeah, no. But I think we've already had that discussion.
Joe Clark, Cisco. I was just going to say, a lot of brought up Yang catalog. That would be a use for instance data, and we would want to augment the metadata that's found in instance data to add some of the specifics that we use in Yang catalog.
So you also suggest that we do not wait? Is that what you...
That's what I'm suggesting, yeah.
I have gotten the same comment from others that they want to augment it, want to be able to augment instance data, metadata.
Eric Voigt, Cisco, and just for the record, if we were to adopt this, we would certainly bring it up with the NetConf messages draft for Yang push. So this is a very useful thing for us.
Just to be clear, Eric, we're not. It's already adopted. It's the question of whether we continue with it and really last call it.
Yes, and I'm saying yes for that.
Oh, okay. Okay, great. Was it?
Kent is a contributor, and I mentioned this before privately as author. The suffix right now is _ext, and I'm just wondering if it's important to maintain that the structure, right? The structure underscore or -ext. I mean, I guess the only I can see why we might want to have a convention for extensions, always having in the module name -extension or ext. But it also is a little bit strange, and I don't think there would ever be another module that would be needing the name IETF structure. So would it make sense to simplify the name is the question.
Think about it when we do 1.2 and it becomes a part of it. Do you still want to use -ext? And
well, it's just part of the module, right? So so the module will go away if we did 1.2. So it's just a matter of what we call the module, not the statement itself.
Yeah, personally, I don't think it would be a big deal either way.
Right. I mean, if we see different types of modules with just types, should they be called something special, like -tc we did for MIBs? I mean, module with just extensions, should it have the same? No, I don't know. It's
Something for the working group
Something
consider.
to debate.
Rob Wilton, Cisco. So 2 comments. One is thinking about how this is used in the instance data document. I'm still not convinced why it needs to use Yang data at all, why that can't just be defined as a regular Yang module. So
That's what
Lada said. Yeah,
That's really a comment on a different document. That's not a
Well,
comment on this document.
it's a comment on the usage of this. So
Yeah, then we shouldn't do this at all. If we were to believe that, you could use plain Yang to mean almost anything. I mean, so currently, if you define something in Yang, you define schema nodes for a data store, config true, config false. That's what it is. And now we would change that definition. So by looking at a Yang module with normal definitions, you don't really know what it's supposed to be used for, right?
maybe.
So today, so I think that Andy, I don't know if Andy is here, but he might have some comments on this. I think his experience was that they tried this and that didn't really work.
Because the other way of solving that problem is just to annotate the Yang module at the top level to say how it's used. So you just use the same standard Yang structure, but you have an annotation with at the top level.
But annotation, you don't need to understand annotations. So that means that someone that just gets this module ignores the thing and thinks that it's supposed to be implemented on a server.
That's fine. That's okay. If they want to implement it, if they're implementing a module they don't understand, then that's their own problem. I don't think that's something I worry about. So the other comments go. If you go back to your previous slide, or you said that now you have a container effectively at the top level, and you always have to have that extra level wherever it's used. I just wonder whether there's going to be some cases like error strings and things, whether that might actually become slightly unwieldy to have that, where you might just want to include just one value or something, and actually having to have that extra level in there is going to make it slightly less useful. I don't
Possibly.
know, but I can't judge.
Well, Ashland Eriksson, instance data actually could use this one or could use a simple Yang module, but I think that instance data is a kind of a special usage. You don't really want, let's say, NACM data in the NACM model and then once more in the instance data model. So it is more correct to use this structure than doing it as a normal module. It can be done.
Joe Clark, Cisco. The other thing that this extension allows that I haven't seen anywhere else is, and something I've used when I was using internally when I was using RESTConf's Yang data, is lists don't need a key element. So I don't know how you would do that or specify that otherwise.
You would have to specify them as config false. Config false nodes don't need this key, so it is possible. But yeah, I still think that this is cleaner and it's more. It's easier to understand what it does than just having a Yang model that, no, you're not supposed to implement it, it's supposed to be something else. I think this is cleaner.
Okay.
Okay, good.
And also, I just want to go back. This was discussed at 103, where I did the presentation, and we polled the whole room, and the room agreed that we did want to have this and not use regular Yang modules. So
yeah,
I don't think we should try to revisit the conversation.
Right, it was
now.
also discussed when the document was adopted, right?
Right, we've actually had that conversation. I think this is the 4th time, by the way, that it's come up. How many, actually, a technical comment, please add to your list how it impacts tree diagrams, and how you would use it when you're using this, how we want to represent, how you want to represent it.
Did we have that in the draft? I don't remember.
No,
it's not there.
It's not. I don't think it's there.
Right. For the tree diagram, we put the Yang data in there.
And Yang data, it's
so we need to probably do the same thing for this, but in this document. Fine. Okay.
Exactly.
That's a good point.
And Yang data was really sort of underspecified. It was like you can do something, and we didn't really specify what it was.
Right. Okay.
That was
that's a good point.
Open.
Update the.
But that's a pretty minor thing. Yeah. So we have, I think, 2 open issues. You have the open issue listed here.
Right.
Plus
we're going to add the
Yang,
example.
plus Yang data. So clearly, we need to address those before working group last call.
Yes.
How many, I'd like to just get a sense of the room of who's read it and how ready people think it is, with the caveat of these 2 items, just so that we get a feel of whether we try to wrap this up before the next meeting or wait one more meeting cycle. So that's really the objective of these questions. So how many have read this version? It's a few. How many have read any version? I think I see like one more hand. I mean, it's not really not significant difference. Other than the objections that have been voiced already, is there additional issues that those who have read the document think that need to be addressed? So we've definitely heard some issues and we've heard some rehashing. Is there anything else that's out there? To me, my takeaway is we're close, but we definitely need more reading of the document. So maybe a little bit like the last document. Let's see if we can get the update out there, get some more comments. And I think for both documents, we'll have to talk among the chairs, including Joel, who's not here, of whether we, if we try to last call before Montreal. Given how little readership on both documents they had, we may use the last call as a way of trying to push reading and getting feedback.
Right.
So I think that applies equally for the last two documents. All right, thank you. And now, Kent, you're here. Sure.
Okay, hi, I'm Kent. I'm going to present handling long lines in inclusions for internet drafts and RFCs. This is presented before. Adrian Farrell presented it at 103. I'm not really going to go through this slide of changes. You can look at the diffs that have been submitted to GitHub or actually using data tracker tool. There are 3 issues that I'd like to discuss with the working group today. So the first, oops, sorry, too fast. Okay, the first is a fix for the overloaded use of the word artwork. So what happened was the draft has been using the word artwork somewhat loosely, but from an email thread entitled line width in formats other than plain text that I had with the RFC editor, Henrik was CC'd, and in that I'd mentioned to him that we haven't officially moved, our IETF hasn't officially moved to XML to RFC v3 yet. And so the reference to artwork was really, in reference to the v2 sense of the word artwork. And he came back and said, I acknowledge, but it's easy to make the wrong association at the start of the reading. And also, I think fitting this idea in the tool chain will be subsequently easier if we target the v3 output only. So he really objected to this idea of using the word artwork. And so I changed it. So now if you look at it, it no longer says artwork, even though the name of the file, the name of the draft is still having artwork folding in the name. It's actually now been transitioned over to using the word inclusions. So you can see in bright yellow there for, I'm sorry, for the folks in the back, I understand it might be difficult to see the black background, but in bright yellows, handling long lines in inclusions in internet drafts and RFCs. So sometimes it's using the word inclusions, which is actually from the X include draft, which, the XML to RFC, they use X includes to, so the use of the word inclusion is pretty commonplace within the tool chain, the tools team. So that's a nice word for them to use, but it's kind of not the word I use everywhere. Sometimes I just say text content. It's kind of in the nature of the sentence. So anyway, I just want to let you know that this change is in the current version of the draft. I view it as an editorial change, but if anyone has any concerns about it, please say so now. Okay, so we're going to plan to move forward with this current language. Next is, should we also have a single / option? And so this has been discussed on the list, and but there was no clear consensus on the list. So trying to get the consensus here today. The proposal is for it to also support both headers. So so there'd be one header, bright yellow, with note with a single / line wrapping, and then whereby one folding only occurs on the maximum column and always continues on column 1. Or 2, the folding could occur on any column with the option for indented continuation. So this is sort of like pretty indents. And that second option is actually one that Martin came up with more recently, trying to make the single backslash approach a little bit more pretty looking. And then the second option, which is actually what we have today too, is we say the current header is note and there's the double backslash. And then this is exactly the one that we agreed to when we adopted the draft, whereas the folded lines continue after the next backslash character on the next line. So the two headers look similar. There's only a one character difference between them, but that one character difference is sufficient for human readers and programs to understand the nature of what they're looking at and how to unfold it or to read it. So so the question is, I guess we have some options. One is A, leave the draft as it is, which is to say we only support option number 2, or B, modify the draft to also support option 1 and 2. And there's also a sub question with related to B, if we actually agree that we would like to support both, which is how do we support? And that was the math that I sent out the other day, and we can talk about if it makes sense to do that or not. So first, I'd just like to get and since this is an already adopted working group document, I can ask the room myself. It's not really a chair question, right?
No, in fact, it's the author's or the editor's responsibility to reach to determine consensus at this point. So.
Exactly. So I would like to ask the room, if I can get a show of hands, please, or first off, any questions? Yes.
Christian, so Martin suggested the pretty wrapping.
Mm-hmm.
Is that not sufficient to just have a backslash we all know and love and then eliminate the indentation? I mean, is that sufficient to actually solve the problem in all cases?
So the math that I sent out the other day became like I think 1 in 200 was the probability was pretty high that there'd be a collision, uncomfortably high. So while it would work most of the time, it's definitely not going to work sometimes. And it's nice to have that fallback solution where you can.
I haven't seen your math. It's hard to believe that it just wouldn't work all the time. And in the case that if it does work all the time, then I would support just doing what we all know and love.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so
it looked like Martin was going to come to the
yeah.
mic.
Martin Björklund. Of course, there are cases where the pretty thing doesn't work. If you need to fold and you have, lots of white spaces that needs to be part of the,
or even just one white space.
Well, then you shouldn't fold at that character, right? So you need to be careful where you fold.
Smart folding.
Well, yeah, smart.
Yeah.
Not,
I mean, if there's a human
now.
doing it, then it's pretty easy for them to sort of find the natural break points and
fairly
avoid
easy.
the problem.
It's fairly easy also for a program to fold on the white space, or just after the white space. I don't think that's a big thing. So I mean, the math is. I have to admit that I didn't study all of them, but I mean, the characters are not just random characters that we want to show here, right? We talk about like XML, JSON, things like that. So I'm not sure that the math actually works in those cases.
Yeah, I tried to account for the some texts would not have backslash showing up naturally in them. So for instance, right. I think I even said base 64, no base 64 encoding includes a backslash character.
Okay.
They all have like pluses and equals symbols and things like that, but never a backslash. Base 64 is one of the things that typically are very long lines, and wrapping is something we want to support for them. But like XML and S strings, which are also something that typically has long lines, never would you find a backslash in them. I don't think, not even in the end of the element character, though, there's one there, right?
Yeah. I mean, you just wouldn't have you wouldn't fold just after backslash, right? That would happen.
Anyway, it does, to your point, yes. You would have to write a smarter, for automated folding.
Yeah.
It'd have to be a smart folding where
A
it
bit
did
smarter,
some.
yes, I agree.
Yeah, so it's
On
just
the
not
other
as
hand, if you
simple.
actually look at the examples where you don't use a smart folder, they're not very nice to read. Anyway, so that's my point. I would of course prefer that, and even if we just do, both of them, 1 and 2, I would prefer, of course, the pretty one to the question there.
Christian, so to follow up on that, if there's a choice between having to work a little bit harder in a tool to use a single solution, I think it's better than having a complex standard, right? I mean, we're talking about automatic folding. If it's possible to always do it with one choice, I think we should, even if it's a little bit harder. I don't know. That's what I think is a cost benefit.
Okay, so maybe there's
From the sort of standards perspective, we always try to define one if we can, if it covers the cases. We try not to define 2. We don't have to.
I think there's an XKCD, artwork cartoon for that one. So trying to get some, so then the questions I have on the screen aren't quite right. I guess first we need to ask if, should we only have one solution without even talking about what it is, what the one is, versus more than one? And I know that sounds a little bit weird because why would you ever want more than one? But again, there's complexity. There's a little bit of complexity involved in the one that we're talking about. If you have a second one, it's just because you have it doesn't mean you have to use it. And it's there for the fallback, right? So and I think I put it in the email, for the programs that are trying to do the automated folding, they do the quick test, can I do this single backslash approach? And 1 out of 200 times it'll fail and it says, okay, I'll do the double backslash approach. So, 0.5% of the time, it'll have to use the backslash approach if it's not smart, if it wasn't written with smarts. Mind you, doing it without the smarts is just a single line. It's like, it's very simple not to do it.
Yeah, I mean, when you say, I'm picturing like we want to be able to do it with a line of awk versus we're going to, write maybe 20 lines of Python. I mean, what kind of complexity are we talking about here? As opposed to avoiding a double solution.
So Rob Wilton, Cisco. So I primarily would like a solution that's guaranteed to work always. So I would like it to be able to, whatever the input is, to be able to fold it. However, I do also agree that as Martin's described, that in some cases when you want to do things that look a little bit better, having a single slash and not having to have that second slash is nice. So I guess my preference is I don't think that doing a single slash covers all cases or can cover all cases in the case you go with Martin's solution. So my preference would be to support both. And in the case of the second one, support the one where you either white space at the beginning of the line, what Martin proposes.
Okay. Yeah, there's definitely, certain conditions. It's, where a bunch of white spaces, it wouldn't be able to fold it. So whereas the double backslash approach would work. So it always works. All right. So I've heard 2 who are primarily interested in just having the one solution, 1, or I guess 2, if you count myself, as preferring actually having 2 solutions, but still that's not enough to get a basis for the sense of the room. So I'll ask the questions again. I guess A would be leave the draft as it is, meaning we only have the double backslash approach that we currently have. Or B, we would add also the single backslash approach, which would be, as Rob says, the one that supports the pretty with the indents and folds can occur on any column.
Kent, well, I hate to jump in because we are running late. I think it might help people respond if they could understand a little bit better of what cases fall apart if you only do A.
So
No,
we don't
sorry.
have.
All
If you only
you do is one.
if you only do
The Martin.
one double I.
Yeah, one double. I.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does it.
It's one double I.
All right.
Yeah. So I mean, so there's so there would be a case where if you had a line that contained nothing but spaces, the entire line, like that went past max care column, right? So it's why would you ever do this? I don't know, but that's the case. Wait a second. So that's the one that's unsolvable. There's other cases where you might have some text and then some and you're not doing the smart folding. So you're not writing the extra 19 lines of Python code. You're just using the one line of awk, where you want to do the cut on the max call, but the very next character is a white space character. So that would then fall into this case that it's not be a false positive. Now, we could write a smarter folder, but if you don't write the smarter folder,
it's still one line of awk. Sorry.
Yeah, it's not one line of awk.
Maybe not.
That
Okay.
help?
All right. So I think that helps people answer the question a little bit better.
Okay. So, so if I can get a raise of hands for those who think we should leave the draft as it is with the single double backslash approach. Nobody. Show of hands for those who think that we should support both the double backslash approach and also the single backslash approach that is the pretty backslash approach. And I think you want to know whether or not there's going to be a third option. Okay. So there will be a third option, which is the only supporting the single backslash. Okay. So again, the B, which is to support both the double backslash and a single backslash approach. Raise your hands, please. So 5, 6, 7.
A few.
Yeah. Okay. And then lastly, C, which is not on the screen, but to only support the single backslash approach that is doing the pretty print.
So that's about the same.
Oh, okay. 4 over there. Okay. So I don't know. There's,
Authors, you get to gauge consensus, and we'll confirm it at working group last call.
okay. Well, I saw 7 hands on the.
Ooh, we don't count.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, there was.
What if I offer to write the code?
It's not just you. It's everybody. It's everyone who wants to
How about
do
if we
folding.
put the awk in, we could give you the awk in the file in the text. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, the document.
Yeah. The document already has awk. So, okay. So,
Yeah, so Kent, we're really
it's about the
over,
same.
so.
Yeah. So, okay. The next question. The question is about having in markers. So this was discussed in 103, but again, no clear consensus. The proposal is to add a footer. So right now we just talked about a header, right? The note, but some were discussing the potentially a need for having a footer. So you would then change the header to, instead of starting with the word note, it would start with the word start. And then you'd also have a footer that just was the identical thing, but ending with the word end. To me personally, as you know, the motivation for wanting to have a footer is unclear, nor is there a request by the RFC editor to have one. But what would the motivation be? Is it to aid extractions? So I mean, there's still going to be lots of artwork / source code that's not folded, and those need to be extracted also. So maybe it would aid some extractions, but not all extractions. So it doesn't really solve the bigger problem. And besides, I strongly believe that we should move away from trying to extract from plain text RFCs. XML is now being published. I don't know if you've seen it, but now in the link where you click on, your choices are PDF, text, XML. It's now available. You can actually download the XML for any draft. So why wouldn't we be extracting from XML instead? So I don't see it really aiding extractions. And is it aiding readers? So again, what about all the unfolded inclusions? You still have the need for those. And then lastly, is it even an issue? I've never heard anybody having an issue with reading.
Rob Wilson, Cisco, without the end marker, how does the tooling know when to stop?
Okay, that's the framing problem. It goes to the extraction. And with XML, it's just the end of the source. So you have open brackets source code and in brackets source code, like your end element. So everything in between is the inclusion.
But people are going to use this against text RFCs as well, unless you're going to take that outside the scope and say this is not to be used for text RFCs. And the other comment in the draft it says to be used in IETF drafts and can also be used in other cases. Mm-hmm. But I think there's many cases where you've got a document, you're running this tooling, you don't want to carry on through the entire document doing this unfolding where a slash might have some other meaning.
Correct. Yeah, it's not running across the entire document, just per inclusion. So per source code element, it would extract the source code element and then run the unfolding algorithm on that single element.
But
Content.
okay, so does this tie to the source code element? As in, this scheme isn't just using this header; it actually requires a source.
No. So how it got extracted is a separate, like a precondition. So some other piece of tooling did the extraction, whether it be from an XML RFC document or some third-party SDO. Somehow someone got it extracted it. That's their problem. But then they feed it into the unfolder.
Okay, so the requirement then is the input is the entire file.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so there's two options and there's no need for a third option. So A, leave the draft as it is, meaning that we're only supporting the header, and B, modify the draft to support both a header and a footer. So can I get a raise of hands for those who think that we should leave the draft as it is, only supporting the header? Raise your hands, please. Okay, and then, or those who think we should modify the draft to support both a header and a footer? Okay, so I saw some and then a few.
I saw a clear majority for A over B, but very few people participating.
Okay, and that is the last slide here. Thank you.
Great.
Okay, so the next presentation is Yang Next analysis, I think.
Quite sure why it's not there.
Perfect.
Oh, that's interesting.
Huh.
Well, it seems I've downloaded it a few times.
It's okay. Great. The clicker's not working.
Okay, just say next.
Next. All right, so there has been some 3 virtual interims, one on February 6th, the 20th, and then March the 20th. The focus for all 3 was on scoring the Yang Next issues. There was a total of 70 issues that were entered over the course of 3 years. The Yang Next repo was created on March 11, 2016. This presentation is reviewing all of the, this presentation reviews the results of those meetings. And there will be a deep dive meeting on this Wednesday in Carlin 3 between 3 and 5. Next, please. Okay, so first, I wrote a Python script that would reach out to GitHub and extract all the issues and run it through Matplot. And so this is a 3D view. It's impossible to see because it's not interactive. With a mouse, you can rotate and it looks really nice. But okay, but I did. Then next slide, please. I did a couple on axes views. So I actually didn't mean to do these because they're not terribly important, but on the left-hand side, you see complexity times importance. And I think the bottom line, the takeaway, is that most of the important issues have low complexity. That's how I'm reading this particular view. And then on the right-hand side, you have complexity times backwards compatibility. And the takeaway here is that most of the backwards compatible issues have low complexity. Okay, so most of the important and most of the backward compatible issues are low complexity. Next slide, please. Seems like I'm missing something in the background. But anyway, I think it's just that's one picture anyway. So so this slide is showing backwards compatibility times importance. So it's sort of an on-axis view, but these are the 2 axes that we really care about. When we think about what's important, right? We want to do what's important. But the backwards compatibility, if it says it's high backwards compatibility, it means that it could be a Yang 1.2. We're not going to break compatibility with the existing Yang. If it says low backwards compatibility, then it's potentially a Yang 2.0, where we're breaking compatibility with existing Yang. If it says unknown, then we just don't know yet, right? That's what it means. So this is the only slide where there's counts. So if you're interested in looking at how many of the issues fall into the various levels, this is the slide to be focusing on to see that. But you can see there's only, for the low backwards compatibility, there's only 3 issues that have been scored as actually being low backwards compatibility. But there's actually 8 issues that have unknown backwards compatibility. And any of those 8 issues could potentially be backwards compatibility breakers. Next slide, please. So this slide is showing the same view as before, but because the unknowns are kind of hard to interpret, I took the value of the unknowns and sprinkled them evenly into the low, medium, high. So for instance, if it said there was 2 unknowns, I added 2 to the low, and I added 2 to the medium, and I added 2 to the high. And it presented this view. It's really unfortunate that the text is kind of occluding the graphics here, but the size of the circles are representing the number of issues. So you get a sense that by and large, most of the issues are backwards compatible and having medium importance. And then there's also backward compatible with high importance. Next slide, please. Okay. So this is the same as the previous slide, but the only difference here is that now I've multiplied the size of the circle is representing the complexity. So now you're having a sense of how much effort it's going to take us to work on this. If we wanted to tackle the medium importance and high backwards compatibility, that's almost all the work. 70% of the work is right there, that big light green circle in the background. Next slide, please. Okay, so where do we want to focus? And this is really the discussion that we need to have on Wednesday. On the left-hand side, do we focus on importance? If we focus on importance, what we're saying is that we don't care if we're maintaining backwards compatibility. We want that topmost row. And but if we're going to break backwards compatibility, if we're going in with the intention of breaking backwards compatibility, then we'd also probably go ahead and grab the medium and the low issues that we know we're going to break backwards compatibility. Go ahead and do them now because we don't want to have to break backwards compatibility again anytime soon. So let's just go ahead and take care of all those ones that we think that have the potential for breaking backwards compatibility, even the unknowns down there that we're not sure if they might break backward compatibility. So on the left-hand side, of a focus on importance, that's probably what we would do. Subject to discussion, of course. On the right-hand side, if the focus is on backwards compatibility, we want that rightmost column. Those are all going to be giving us the backwards compatibility, but then there's also those unknowns. We don't really know yet if they're, how highly backwards compatible they might be. And then you see that little medium with a circle. It's just one issue, but we probably go ahead and grab that one because it's a medium. When we say medium backwards compatibility, is probably a way to at least do some of it in a backwards compatible way. So if we were to do that, that's what we'd end up with. So that's actually the end of the presentation and where I want to stop. I'm just going to ask the group if they could give us some feedback for the meeting on Wednesday. What should we focus on? Where should we focus the discussion for Wednesday? Focus on importance, focus on backwards compatibility. Do we have enough information?
Jürgen Schönwelder, I think there are 2 other dimensions that are important. One dimension is, do we actually know how to solve it? So sometimes you have questions where people say, yeah, that's high important, but we don't really know how to do this. And the other question is, typical cases, you have something where there's a solution or even multiple solutions, but people don't agree on that. So one thing you should keep in your mind is, what is your timeline? And don't sign up for things that don't have a solution or no consensus for a solution, and then get stuck on that.
Okay. So that's, I see Tim in line, but I think that brings a great point, the timeline. So let's have a conversation about what we think the timeline should be. But first, Tim, please.
Just a real quick question. So if you talk about backward compatible, what is the number actually of features that you're talking about that would be backward compatible that were low or medium complexity? I'm assuming most of the high complexity ones are not backward compatible.
So on the, you see there's 14 plus 18, 32 plus 4, 36 out of the 48 issues were highly backwards compatible.
Say that
36 out of 48 issues.
Okay. So that answered a piece of the question.
75% of the issues were.
Yeah, I will say I don't know about adoption. I mean, even going from Yang 1.0 to 1.1, it's taking time for the industry to pull into that, right? So putting out a Yang 1.2, you would wonder, just what that adoption time frame would be that that people are barely on 1.1 right now, if they're even there.
And that's an excellent point, and it goes to the compatibility dimension, because things that are compatible we could do as extensions rather than as a new language. Things that are not compatible would absolutely require a new version, and then we can argue about the version number. So it's a little hard in the abstract to say that you care a lot about a particular one and you want to see an extension immediately, but the feedback of focus on things that are highly compatible so we can do it in a modular way is something that would be useful feedback now, if that's what the room feels. But I'll interpret what you're saying is be very careful about pushing hard for anything that beyond Yang 1.2. I mean, sorry, beyond 1.1.
Yeah, because the industry's not even there yet. So it's a question to me of, should we, is it the next one 1.2 or 2.0? And then it's really based upon when the industry adoption curve will happen on it, right?
Right.
But then you said there's, 2/3 of the features out there are already backward compatible, and if you could box them up into a release, I'm just torn.
Right.
Just information.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I think Jürgen's point was a really good one to take away, which is in your discussion on Wednesday, or in the discussion on Wednesday, is added the dimension of how easy is it to solve.
So we did have a dimension. Complexity was the third dimension. So that was the 3D view I showed you in the beginning. And actually, I think you go to the next slide, you'll see where it kind of, one more slide, please. Yeah, that one. So this one tries to factor in the complexity as well. It's kind of hard to read, but you get a sense for it. Most of the effort would be doing that, that one thing. But Jürgen also made the other point, which was what's the timeline? What's the time frame? Do we as a working group have a sense? I mean, or are we open-ended about this? I mean, Lou made a point at the beginning, it would be at least 2 years. I think last time it was actually 3 years before when we started to finish. Is there a hard deadline that we need to work towards or should work towards?
Rob Wilton, Cisco. So I think it'd be useful. I think the analysis we've done so far is useful, but actually I think with the list of issues, we could probably go through that list and then classify them into ones that we think are definitely worth doing, because either the scope isn't too hard, we understand the solution, etc., and we agree it's worth doing. So that's one set. Another set of issues is ones we definitely don't want to do. Either it's not important enough or it's too complex, whatever. We just push those off and say, look, we know we don't want to discuss those. And then there's a set in the middle of these ones require further discussion. It's unclear either way. But I think then with that sort of discussion, we could maybe end up with a more bounded scope of what we think the real problem is, bring that back to the working group and say, look, this is what we think the scope would be. It would be to fix these issues. We know the answers to these, or these ones are still open. Should these be included or not? Okay. So that would be the way I'd suggest going.
Right. So certainly we can do that on Wednesday. That will be the exercise we do on Wednesday. I was just hoping to collect more feedback, like the timeline information, but I think that's it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Okay, next up is Chin.
Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Qingwu from Huawei, and I'm here to discuss this factory default setting. This is not the first time to introduce this draft, and actually recapture a little bit for this problem space. Actually, current netconf doesn't allow you to reset the running data store. For candy data store, you also cannot reset without changing the running, and for dynamic, you also cannot reset to the initial state. So the same apply to the RESTconf. So the solution we proposed, actually we define a method to allow you to reset the data store to the initial state, to the factory default contents. Actually, this can be used during the zero-touch bootstrapping stage, or when the existing configuration actually has some major errors. And so in this draft, we define one RPC we call the reset data store RPC. In addition, we actually define a new factory default data store. It is read-only. it only can be set by the server, but it cannot be changed by the management operation like add config, etc. And this is a status update. Actually, this draft, the history, actually, we moved the draft from the netconf to the netmod, and we have several discussions. In last IETF meeting, we discussed this draft, got a lot of support, and recently the change actually based on the discussion, we actually have two minor open issues discussed in the last meeting, and we actually put back the config based on Robert's comments, and also we have a few reference update. This is all the change we made, and so we like to request the working group to adopt this work.
How many people have read the draft? This version of the draft? A few.
Any version of the draft?
Oh, any version of the draft? More? Okay. I think there's been enough discussion, yeah? Okay. So, yeah, so let's perhaps... How many people are interested in the problem? A fair number. How many people are not interested in the problem? No one. Okay, so raise your hand if you believe that the working group should adopt this version of the draft as the basis for a working group document. A good number, yeah. How many people think the working group should not adopt this version of the draft as basis for a working group document? Raise your hand. It's no one. Okay, great. So I think that's, we'll confirm that on the list.
Thank you.
And actually, we'll just confirm it as, we'll ask for if there's any objections on the list.
Yeah.
Otherwise, will be adopted by default.
Thank you. Okay, this is Xinhua again. And the second draft we like to discuss is NMDA-based notification. And
Just say next.
oh, next. This actually a very short draft, and motivation to do this because we already have a netconf-based event that defines the FCC 6470 actually, and this can be used to monitor the netconf session and to report some common system event. But when we introduce the NMDA, maybe additional event need to be incorporated. Currently, the problem is when we introduce like intent data store and operation data store, they may involve some internal process. You need to apply some config data from intent to the operational. So how to keep track of some of the event, like some of object cannot applied, so we can allow the user to to report the failed object, also to notify some reason why it cannot apply. So we propose to define one NMDA specific notification, and history. Go back to the history. Actually, this draft also moved from the netconf to the netmod. And last meeting we received some discussion. We presented this draft, and two comments actually on the mailing list. One is about the clarification for the commit RPC, and this new notification defined in this draft. Actually, we think for how to identify the management session, actually we can potentially use the username, but it is optional. We also can use some other parameter. We can propose to use a module tag to do that. Another one actually is to discuss the for intent and running. Usually, when you apply the config state to the operational, this update will usually actually happen, usually immediately. So changes since the last version, actually, we added the module tag actually to as another parameter to identify the management sessions. In some cases, the same user may have a different application, so we can use module tag to indicate that. The second is we actually remove two redundant notification. One is apply intent start, the other one is apply intent end. For intent start, actually, we think because as I clarified, it almost happen at the same time as the commit operation, so it doesn't need it. Also, for the intent end, actually, we can use the NMDA apply the update to indicate this. So this is something seems not needed. So we remove these two. Next. This is the updated for the model structure. Actually, you can see we actually added the application tag, actually use the module tag to do that, to identify the management session. In addition, we actually, we can use this model together with an NMDA diff and to use an NMDA diff to compare the difference between the intent data store and operation data store to identify what is the missing object or which object is not applied. Next. So this is the notification we defined. It will be used at a stage, after the commit operation, and keep track of this internal process, set by the server. Next. So we think this draft actually make several revision, and we think we like request Wingo to adopt this work.
How many people have read this version of the draft? Please raise your hand. Very few.
How about any version?
Any version of this draft? Just a little more, but still very few.
How many think it's an interesting problem that we should be spending time on? How many think this is an area we should be spending time on? A little more, but still few. I think we have to do a little more education is what you're trying to achieve, and then see if there's support for it. So maybe go back and summarize what the objectives are on the list.
Okay, I can take this to list to inspire some discussion.
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hey, Chris?
Hi, so it comes up every once in a while that we need a geolocation, common geolocation object. So, and I also had an old boss that was very excited about this, so I decided to write it down. Next slide. Oh, do I have a thing?
I don't know how to get rid of the bar. I don't know why it's there.
What bar? Oh, that bar. Oh, so why do we need this? So many applications have a need for a geolocation. You might want to map your data center, router, firewall, file server location. You might also want to map your fiber endpoints, failures like fiber cuts, where your customers are, weather stations, cameras, so forth. So it's good to have a common grouping that can be reused throughout all the different models that might need a geolocation. So it's simple, right? You just do a lat long and maybe a height. And it turns out not to be that simple. You might need to add some accuracy for your measurement. And what's your height relative to? Is it the mean sea level? Is it geoid, which we'll get to later? Or is it to the ground? So there's a lot of standards around this, actually. As you start digging, open it up, right, the can of worms, there's a lot to actually learn, and there's a lot of work that's done on this. primarily in the area of the standardized coordinate reference systems. The one that we're all using with our phones is the GPS one, is WGS84, and it's sort of there's lots of like fun things to talk about. But originally, when they sent the satellites up, the geoid was off by the geoid maps where they sort of think mean sea level is. It was off by at least 100 meters in certain places. So they send up another satellite that maps the gravity, right? Because you have different iron and different concentrations of things in the Earth, and it actually changes where sea level is, right? So they've slowly gotten better and better, right? And we've gotten closer and closer. So all these things you have to learn about, and you have to pay attention to them. There's other standards as well. W3C has a standard object, GML, KML are markups, XML that include objects, as well as IETF. We have one, and a URI. There's also things you might need to consider, like continental drift, right? Your location is going to change over time. So if you're referring to a router in a building, it's actually going to move a few centimeters or so per year. You also might be concerned with other planets or asteroids. You might have routers on the moon. And then finally, you might actually want to map, have a database of geolocations in a virtual reality. Or you might want to have an alternate mapping, right, where you've modified reality. Still reality you're talking about, but somehow you want to look at it in a different way. So this is the grouping, and this is the grouping that I came up with. It tries to cover all of this. A lot of it's optional. So when you just want lat long and maybe height, that's all you have to put in there. But if you need the other things, it's in here. So if you look, the alternate system, this is sort of a catch-all if you want to sort of go way out there. Otherwise, we have the astronomical body, which would default to Earth, and the geodetic system. Now, the geodetic system is what's actually gives meaning to your coordinates, right? So it tells you what height is relative, what your ellipsoidal values are, like lat and long. And then, so as a part of that, the datum value, that would be like WGS84, in other words, the GPS one. There are others, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. But we also might want to specify our coordinate accuracy and our height accuracy. Sometimes those are not the same, so we can split them. And then as far as the coordinates, we cover ellipsoidal, which are lat long, as well as Cartesian, which would be like a vector from a center of mass. The velocity is there primarily for stable movement. This isn't meant to track, orbital dynamics and stuff. It's to track continental drift, or something that has very stable movement. And we also need a timestamp. When did you take the measurement? So I define the grouping, and then I need to make sure that we're actually compatible with what other people have done out there, right? We're not just inventing something new that's not going to work. So I went through the various different other standardized groupings. The IETF URI defines lat long, an optional height, an optional uncertainty, and an optional CRS, or geodetic datum. It does not include a timestamp. So this is fully expressible in the Yang. I'll note this on each one. We use decimal 64 values in the Yang. So different other markups will use, different other models will use different values. So in this case, it's strings, right? So it's sort of infinite precision. W3C, we've got lat long, optional height, optional accuracy, optional height accuracy, and it includes heading and speed. I didn't see that there's any way to actually change the CRS, so it's just defaulting and always WGS84, the GPS one. In this case, the types are doubles. So the only difference you get here is we have decimal, we use decimal 64. We actually map that's able to have a huge accuracy, but doubles, at the very, very extremes, the doubles may be a little bit better. But for all intents and purposes, they map back and forth. The GML is a very abstract model. It basically abstracts the entire CRS system. It can do any number of dimensions. I mean, it's much broader. But in the case of if we limit ourselves to trying to do geographic locations, it supports ellipsoidal and Cartesian. It's not clear whether they standardized their CRS, but there's a place, you specify what the CRS is. I didn't see that they had a registry though, so it could just be random strings. Well, not random, but it also includes an observation, which would include the timestamp, but the observation object includes things like the target of a camera, or result of a measurement. So this is mostly expressible. Again, it's very generic, so we're not going to try to capture everything they're doing. KML was put forth by Google. It's now standardized by, I think, OGC, the Open Geospatial Consortium, Geographic Consortium. This is a superset of W3C, but also modifies and gives you more control over what the height is. And they include clamp to ground, which means we're not going to specify the height. It's just the ground. Relative to ground, and absolute. Absolute would be like the geoid. So how far away from the geoid you are. And the geoid is generally mean sea level. It also has a clamp to seafloor and relative to seafloor. And then it includes other things like the camera direction. It's used like for Google Earth. So this is also fully expressible, although you'd have to map the seafloor values. We don't have a way to do that. We don't have a seafloor in our grouping. So some examples. This is a restaurant in New York. It shows just the lat and long. Locatable item is not part of the grouping. I'm just using that because that's where the grouping is used, you could imagine. So a more complex example, the Pont des Arts in Paris. This includes a timestamp, lat long, and a height. It's 35 meters above mean sea level. A non-Earth example, the Apollo 11 landing site. You can see that here, this is interesting because we have, we had to specify a new reference frame. The astronomical body is the moon. There is a standard geodetic datum. In this case, the string is me. In the registry, that actually defines what me is. And we'll get to the registry and whether we need one in a few slides. And then the lat and longitude on the moon of the landing. The timestamp is actually when the Eagle landed. I also heard that one of our esteemed chairs once did a virtual reality project and designed a spotted cow. So we have here Kent's spotted cow, and it's in the alternate system of Kent space. This is all made up, by the way. No one's laughing. A tough crowd. The geodetic system is Kent 87. It's at 0.5 of the CRS. So the open issues. Should we have, so height, there's this open issue of height. Should we have more relativity here instead of just to the geoid? Should we add options like KML has? Should we add like to ground versus to geoid? Or maybe just have a generic string that allows the local user to put a value there to indicate what the height is relative to. The other issue that's probably going to cause some commotion is the registry. We already have a registry in the IETF for the URI, and so it'd be nice to reuse it. One issue that I see with using the URI registry is that it's specification required and IESG approval. So it's very hard to get things in this registry, which is fine if you're just going for very standard values. But we include things like alternate system and virtual realities. The registry I specify is literally just to stop having duplicate values, right? So I had specified it as first come, first serve. That might be too loose, in which case we upgrade it to designated expert and say, direction to the designated expert of no duplicates, right? You're not allowed to have opinions, put the value in as long as it's not duplicating a value. So we have to decide if that's useful, or, people will just put the value they want in there and they don't care, right? They want to get work done. Right. So the other option is if we keep with our own registry, can we modify the URI registry to be less strict? Would the people, would the IETF be open to that? I'm not sure. Or and also, should we use URN is used right now to standardize the values in the URI registry. So you have like URN OGC for the Open Geographical Consortium standards. It's very interesting that they use ESPG. So the world uses values that are done by what's now called the International Association of Oil and Gas Producers, but the E is for European. So it's fun. All the different people involved in this. So should we just reserve a earn prefix to point at that registry, and no one's allowed to reserve anything with that prefix, right? And then we can just use that very standard worldwide registry for most of the values. And then we leave open the ability to add things for people's virtual realities or alternate systems. So that's sort of an open issue. This is new work. No one's had a chance to see it. Yep. Any comments, questions?
Kent, as a contributor, the Cartesian coordinate system, how important is that from a user perspective?
That's a good question. I just published this and I've started getting a little bit of feedback on it. The Cartesian is actually what like WGS84 uses, and then they map to the ellipsoidal so that we can actually make sense of it.
Okay.
So, it seems worthwhile to have it in there because it's how it's stored.
Okay. So with Cartesian coordinate systems, it's necessary to have a reference frame, and I didn't see that in your model. Do you have one? Like where is origin?
The origin is generally the center of mass, and that's specified by the geodetic datum. So,
Okay.
Well, it'll say it's the center of mass of the Earth, right? Is the sun? It will be the sun where the vector is.
Oh, for the right, for the geodetic, that makes sense. The center of the Earth, but for Cartesian, it'd be a point on the surface of the Earth.
So right, so you have three axes and spherical, right?
Mhm.
So you have your X,
Oh, I see.
Y, Z.
Okay, gotcha. Okay. And also the one thing I know from my history of mapping back and forth between WGS84 and Cartesian is that the ability to, the resolution, get the math, you lose the resolution very quickly. I think it can support maybe up to 30 kilometers. So you would actually have to have, maybe that's sufficient for your use case, but
It's much better now. So there's a couple different things in play with that. It has to do with where they have a table because they measured the gravitational changes around the surface, right? Because the Earth is not perfectly solid iron, right? And so they have these mapping tables that adjust because the GPS geoid is a mathematical, ellipse, right? And then they have to adjust that based on measurements they've taken. So the value you're talking about, the accuracy, is how accurate those tables are. Right, so that used to be like 200 kilometers or something like that, right? The EGM Earth Gravitational Model 2008, which is the most recent one, gets it down to it's a small number. It's like 100 meters or something.
okay. And then my last comment, the vector was it was 3 axes, but it is equally applicable in both Cartesian as well as geodetic space.
Yeah, because it's just from you, right? So it's from your location. That's where it's basically your heading and speed, right? So originally I had the value as heading and speed. So so for continental drift, the continents they don't just move on the plane, right? They move up and down.
What I meant is if the coordinate is being a geodetic coordinate, then the vector should be interpreted in geodetic space, coordinate space, and if it's a Cartesian coordinate, then the vector should be interpreted in Cartesian space.
No, so the Cartesian or the ellipsoidal gives you your location. The velocity, it's a velocity vector, right? So it is where you're at. So you've identified where you're at, whether Cartesian or ellipsoidal. Now you have a location. Now the question is, what direction are you going and how fast? And that's what that vector is. It doesn't map into like an ellipsoidal case. If it was heading and speed, that would be an ellipsoidal because you would have a 360-degree heading and then a speed along that heading. This is a three XYZ, right? So it's just saying where, how fast am I going in the XYZ direction, the magnitude of the vector and where the vector is.
I'm just thinking the axes, what is X, what is Y? They're different in geodetic space
Oh,
versus.
I see what you're saying. So it's that is aligned with the
reference frame.
with the geoid.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So the center of mass, whatever the Cartesian would be, that's the same axis.
Okay. All right. So that's it.
Yeah.
From a contributor perspective. Any other comments?
Rob Wilton, Cisco. So I generally think this is useful, but I have no expertise to be able to review this or say it's correct or it covers everything or you've got the things upside down. I don't know, but I think it's useful. I think it's worth working on.
I was probably there, 3 or 4 months ago, right? I had to do a lot of research to make sure I wasn't screwing this up so you could trust me. I don't think you should trust me. It should be reviewed. I don't know if David Lampeter is in here. No, but he just looked at this. He actually does, I don't remember what telecom he works for, but he's been over this draft and specifically said, oh yeah, and he actually helped me a little bit, right? With making sure that I hadn't made any mistakes. So we do need to get people reviewing it who would be using it.
Yeah. I think let's get the right technical review. I'm happy to review the rest of it.
Yeah, so maybe I'll try to, sign people up to send something to the mailing list saying, I've done this mapping, for this purpose, and I've reviewed this, and it looks good.
So that actually brings in an interesting question about, polling the room for interest if we don't have the right, people in the room, if actually it's a separate group of a community that would need to contribute to that discussion. But nonetheless, I think it would be interesting to get some sense from the room. I realize that this is a 0-0 and first time being presented, but still it's always interesting to get a sense from the room, a level of interest. So how many people in the room have actually read the draft? Please raise your hand. Wow. So a few. And there's only one version of the draft, so I don't need to ask any other question there.
No, there's one. Is there one?
Oh, is there?
Yeah,
Okay.
I grabbed it because you wanted three
Okay.
things for the velocity.
Okay. All right. And then how many people think this is interesting work? Please raise your hand. Actually, more than read the draft, so that's good. And I think it's probably premature to actually ask for anybody, to do an adoption to say, or actually, what
I
do
don't
you
know
think?
if it's premature because
is there anything more to do?
So no, I mean, it is the first time I'm presenting. I wouldn't mind asking on the list maybe polling the room if people think we could ask soon about adoption because it has been on the list before, right? People have talked about the need for a geolocation object on the list. So it's work I think we've already kind of sort of agreed that we might want to take on. Does anybody think that we need to do much more before adopting this or, polling for adoption?
So this is Tim Karinoki. I was just going to make that same statement. I mean, to be honest with you, long lat height, that's 80% or more of what we need, right?
Yep.
And so, to try to do you got a long tail here, right? And so looks like you got everything that you basically need. And I know that, in fact, last week, this actually came up and said, hey, look, we need to get some geolocation stuff for some metadata for some network elements. Do we want to build our own model? I said, hang on. But it depends on how quick the IETF can do this stuff, right? So, but you've got more than enough that I've seen in any location type of thing and models.
Right, and that's a good point. I think it is almost too much. Maybe I should ask the question: Does anyone think that it's too much?
Before you ask that question, I'd like to defend it.
Okay, please.
This came up from people. The reality is we do have networks right out there. We put computers on the moon, right? We send spaceships to asteroids to land on them. There's no reason to limit ourselves here. And I'm not going to break anything by putting it here. And I did my research, right? So when we're putting when I show the Apollo 11 landing site, right? It's actually referring to a worldwide standard for the geolocation on the moon, right? It's not like I'm just playing around throwing things in there for games.
Jeff, I was in very old life. I had internship at the Geological Survey. Do we have anybody that does liaison work towards various nation state entities like that?
I don't know anybody that liaises to the OGC or anything, but I'd be open to hearing.
I will rattle a few trees. Thank you.
Benoit, so I think it's interesting. Now, if you're asking a question, who has the expertise here to review the location aspect of it, not the Yang part, right? And if there is nobody, we have to ask who would be the right experts outside of this working group, outside of the IETF, wherever. But if we've got the feedback of those guys saying this is good from a geolocation point of view, then we're fine.
And so, Benoit, I agree with you, but I think that goes to the last call as opposed to adoption. We could go ahead and adopt it as a working group and agree to work on it, and then collect the experts to do the final review.
Fair enough, right? But we'll have to do that anyway.
Correct.
Yeah,
and I
think
don't
that's a
believe the
good point,
expertise
though.
will be here.
Okay.
Rob Wilson, Cisco, but it does also look like you've already done a lot of research here in existing other models that are modeling the same data. So it's not like this is a blank slate where you just say, oh, I've come up with this new scheme. It's like I've looked at these ones, I've coalesced these together into what I think is the right one. So I think you've done a lot of the legwork already here.
Yeah, the comparison, that was the real point behind the comparison, right? Was that I found three other standards, right? That have been standardized. They have SDOs behind them who have all looked at it, came to very similar outcomes, right? And then I'm in the draft showing that we're not deviating from these, right? And that we can map back and forth to them. I do think that does grant some legitimacy to the work there already.
And then my other comment is I think IETF takes a long time to produce Yang models, and we've shown that again and again and again. Whereas I think they would be really useful to the world in general to have more standard Yang models coming out of IETF that people can use. And even if they're not 100% perfect, I think we'll get to the stage where we can fix those mistakes and we can get something that's 99% is good enough as a starting point.
Okay.
If we can do it quicker.
Yeah, I think actually I'm convinced. It seems like there's a lot of interest in the room and you've done the homework. So let's go ahead and move with a poll for adoption. How many people in the room? So I've already asked how many people read the draft and have interest in the draft. So now we're just going to do the poll for adoption. How many people in the room would like to see this draft adopted as a working group, as the basis for a working group document? Please raise your hand. As many people have raised their hand. And how many people would not like to see this document used as the basis for a working group document? Please raise your hand. That's none. Okay, so we will confirm that on the list, and like the last time, if no one can, it'll be adopted by default.
Cool. Thank you.
And so Jürgen.
You're gonna have to tell us next. You're gonna have to say next.
Okay, good. That's a little easy.
Yes.
No problem. Yeah, Jürgen Schönwelder, I'm going to talk about an update to the Yang data types, the common Yang data types that almost every Yang module is importing. And I kept a list of things to add on my computer. And at some point in time, I thought I'd just start putting that into a new document so people can actually look at what might be in there. Next slide, please. So what I've added is a type for date and a time for time, because we only had date and time, but sometimes you only need one of them. I've added types for time intervals, like in minutes, seconds, what have you. You can read the whole list. Really basic stuff, but popular stuff. I added something that's called a revision identifier for the current version of Yang, kind of telling you which version you're talking about. And I copied in a version of the node instance identifier that got prototyped from NACM, because it seems to be useful outside of the NACM context, and people might not want to have a dependency on NACM if they just want to use a node instance identifier. Kent made a suggestion we should have an email address type, so I looked into that and added something. Next slide. So the issues, you think a date is simple, it should be simple, but then you think about what does it mean to have a canonical format for a date, You think it should be simple. You look into XSD specification. They have a data type of date. They have text about canonicalization of that, and I didn't understand it. And that's why it's here. It's probably a reminder for myself to keep looking into this unless there's someone in the audience who understands date canonicalization. If not, I'll just keep it as a reminder for myself. The next one is probably something where more people have an opinion about, and that's the number of bits that you need to represent time at different resolutions. So if you have a nanoseconds timer, then probably people would say, yeah, 64 bits is not a bad idea, because that ticks pretty fast. If you have a time that you express in minutes, then probably 32 bits are fine. So the question is where to draw the line. And opinions.
Rob Wilton, Cisco. So I think types are cheap, type defs are cheap, so just define them in both.
I want to propose to modify the regex pattern for the domain name, because in fact it doesn't do what the description promises. It says that it can be used in DNS-A and AAA records. This is not really the case, because in those records you can also have first wildcards, which means asterisks, and second slash, that's used for the reverse domain registration, basically. Like, I don't know, something /64 for CIDR style domain delegation. So I actually wanted to propose it in the mailing list. I wanted to propose some pattern for that, but I haven't had time to test it. So, but I think it would be a good addition, because otherwise it really doesn't do what it promises. On the other hand, there is this host type. And in this case, I think that it should be stricter, just to follow the strict rules for host names. In this case, it's a union of domain name and IP addresses. And in this case, it's probably not good to permit just a single dot, which is permitted in domain name. So I think it would be useful to extend the domain name type and restrict the host type, probably.
So please send an email, because that's a new issue and I can only track it.
I just wanted to get some feedback whether people think that this is a useful thing to do, because for the host, for example, it probably cannot be done with the same name, which is sort of.
Well, we likely don't change anything that is defined, but we might create a new definition that does what you need.
Scanning your draft really quick right now. Is the canonical format, I think I actually ran into a problem here with our current one. It is for date and time, does it just go down to second?
No, because you can have a decimal dot and sub-second granularity.
Do you remember what the precision was of that? Did it go down to nanosecond, or was it?
It's hundredths of a second. Yeah, it's dot and then two digits.
I don't know if this would be our NBC case, but it would be really nice if we had more precision in the canonical format. Maybe we have a new, that might be a non-backward compatible, but yeah. And as far as the counters, yeah, I don't know if I would say both. I would just say 64, because a lot of representations are string. I guess the gRPC case might not be right, but it's kind of, I find myself arbitrarily limited when we just pick like UN32. It's like, okay, but it's a string in most cases, right? So let me have a bigger.
Well, you also generate implementation data structures from this.
That's true.
There it might
No, I mean, it is true, but if you're going as far as to model the data, I don't know yet. So my choice is bigger is better.
Okay.
Kent as a contributor. So my first thought was maybe we should have some more types in addition to hours. We could have days, weeks, months, years, perhaps. Who knows how these models might be used. But my second thought was, are you defining these because we talked about the missing duration? And I mean, are these trying to fill in that gap for duration?
Well, there's a definition for, we don't have a definition for duration.
Yeah.
But if you look at real data models, if people model a timeout, they usually have something that is a millisecond or a second. So it's very commonly used to have these unit-specific types and not like an XSD duration, which is a relatively complex construct. Could do the same, but it's commonly what not people implement.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about a model where my duration was something on a couple weeks or a month. It's like this. It was a larger, and it would have been convenient to represent it in terms of like if you had larger granularities, days and weeks. It makes it more natural to express these kinds of things.
Yes, I mean, I believe it's even an ISO standard format for durations that's out there. We could add something to that, but I don't think it's a replacement, because if you really just model a timeout and you know it's going to be in milliseconds, you would just want to have a number rather than something more complex.
Okay. And so maybe we can ask some questions. Oh, first to you. What are your thoughts in terms of the expediency that you would like to see this being adopted? And like, is it something that you want to work on for a while before moving towards that? Or?
Yeah, I personally, I don't care so much about adoption.
Okay.
We can leave it this way. You can adopt it. It doesn't really matter to me personally. I'm one of the guys who doesn't care.
That's funny. All right. Well, how many people have read this version of the draft? And how many people think this is interesting work? Like that's something that fair number for both questions. And I don't know. Does it even make sense? All right. So how many people would like to see this version of the document used as a basis for a working group document? Please raise your hand. Quite a number. And how many would not like to see this document adopted as a basis for a working group document? None. Okay. So I guess we could confirm an adoption poll on the list. And I mean, whether or not it ever gets, to last call, we'll see. If
So this is a very interesting case, right? Because basically it's a standard module for defining types that we're going to use everywhere. And all we're basically saying is let's keep doing that, right? Let's just keep revving that thing and adding more common types. That kind of makes sense. Sure.
Yeah, I'm just going to add whether the process is too heavy here. We want a way of just getting this stuff out much more quickly.
Yeah, sorry. And that was a joke, my last.
And actually, to Rob's point, I was thinking of, does it make, to that last point, I was really thinking, does it make sense to rev this as a BIS or to just have a new module that defines these new types? And I think it's a good experiment, going back to Chris's comment. Let's see how fast we can do it. Let's just use the model to keep revving this.
Okay. Or the question is, how hard would it be for us to agree on what goes in there and put it on GitHub and be done? So, and that's the sort of thing is that the publication delays, does that help us here at all? Or is there some way of pushing it through that publication queue a lot quicker? But otherwise, it's sort of, we're just delayed by an extra year.
Well,
beyond.
let's use this as an experiment.
Okay.
The other option is we just do a new types module. And it's a new.
But that'll be just as slow, won't it? Mine's more is.
I think this might prove to be faster.
So a data point. This is the 690.91 is the second version, and when the second version came along, during the ISG processing, all the comments were on things we didn't touch. Yeah, so not on the new stuff. They had lots of new issues on the old stuff. So that's the fun.
So we could just do it in a new module.
Well, I don't care. I mean, whatever happens.
I think it's a good experiment. Let's see how fast we can run the process. On this one. Yeah, rather than doing something new, let's see how fast we can run a BIS.
Okay, but shouldn't we also at the same time be trying to work out how to modify these things in a more efficient way? Outside of that process, what's the way of Because we're just adding some new
Are you,
types.
are you suggesting that we should not be looking at producing RFCs? And Kent is telling me that we're way over time.
Maybe.
Okay, so unfortunately, it's the IETF and we're in the business of producing RFCs, so let's try it. But it's an interesting point. Let's think about it. Maybe talk on the list, talk outside. And we have a few minutes left for the next one. And by the way, I'll note that we only made it through like a third of your slides. So that was effective. And please take a look at the rest if you're interested in the topic. Thanks.
Hi, working group. This is Michael from Huawei, and today I want to introduce a document for young data model for event measurement. Next slide. Yeah, this document basically introduces a young data model for ECA-based network policy management. It can provide the ability to network management function and to control and configure the monitoring state, a change on the network element, and take a simple action when triggers a condition on the system state. And this document first introduced in last half the meeting, and the working group suggests us to coordinate with another document. Next slide. So we had to do some update. First, we polish the text and clarify the difference between the Boolean trigger condition and the threshold trigger condition, and synchronize some terms with one already published RFC. It introduced a policy-based management framework. And we split it, event management young model into trigger young and another is event young. Make the event trigger reusable, and another document can reuse this grouping and define their condition. And we also changed the two leaves the name to help reader easy understanding. Next slide. Okay, this is a model's change. We split the condition and define it at a reusable grouping, and then it can so this in the event module way, this grouping can be reused, and another document also can reuse its conditions. So next slide. Okay, this is our next step. We'd like to select these comments and improve our solution document. And if it's good enough, I think maybe I'd like to second the working group adoption. Okay.
Well, let's do what our sort of standard question list has been. How many have read the draft? Any version? Again, so that's a few. How many think that this is an interesting problem we should be working on? It looks about the same. Let me ask the counter. How many think this is something we should not be working on? No one. It may be early, but let's get the feedback anyway. Okay. How many think the draft should be adopted as a starting point? You want to ask the question?
Rob Wilton. So I think there's a couple of other drafts that seem to be roughly quite similar, or my understanding was they were similar. The same idea of monitoring for some event and then taking some action. I think there might have been two other drafts.
I remember one of them, and that one seems to have disappeared, but I'm not sure which two you're thinking of.
So I can't remember the authors. I could probably try and find them, but I just wondered whether there's one solution that could cover all of them, or are they definitely different things? I don't know.
On the one I'm thinking of, I definitely thought there was similarity, and I seem to remember asking authors to work together. And if we did decide to adopt one, that's a way of forcing together. Although it is true that sometimes authors feel that their solutions now adopted, that they've won. So it can work either way.
Okay.
I'm not sure we're really going to adopt right now. I think we're just taking it as input. And I think exploring those, if you could send that to the list, and exploring those is something that's definitely worthwhile before even going to a poll. But I would like to just see what people think, nonetheless. But do you mind sending those two to the list that you think?
If I can find them, yeah.
Yeah, all right, thanks. So this is just to give feedback to the chairs right now. How many think that we should be adopting now? It's less than who have read. How many think we should wait a little bit? And there's a few there as well.
Right. So Rob mentioned some other drafts. So 2 IETFs ago, we presented a very similar concept of the models, and we didn't get enough feedback. We didn't know if it's interesting enough for the working group. So we haven't continued too much on that side. So from what I see here, this is a totally duplicate to that, pretty much same concept.
Okay, I think that it would be great to have you work together and see if you can come up with a consolidated draft, if you're willing. I'm asking, don't run away. So I'm looking for you to say yes, you're interested or willing.
Have to talk to all the co-authors. We had a working group, design team. So a lot of people participated in that
I don't remember a
activities.
design team on this topic.
The Young Push design teams.
Oh, okay. So this is coming out of Yang Push in
Yeah.
NetConf. Okay. I actually did have sort of that a feeling that there was some overlap here with NetConf. One of the actions I think will be for the NetMod and NetConf chairs to talk to each other, talk to yourself, and see where we end up. It would be good to not try to reinvent something that there's already been good work done on. So if we could try to bring those together, that would be really good. I think from this, we definitely will not be adopting, but we'll have more conversation and potentially move this document over to NetConf.
No, I don't think so. Because another document also
This is an area that I certainly view as gray area between the two groups, and we just have to work together. And it's not like it's a hard and fast which one does it, as long as someone's willing to do the work. We're clearly over time. Thank you very much. Actually, Shufang, you want to say something?
No, you asked me to stay here. So.
Okay, you answered the question. You answered the question. Thank you. We have a.
Look, you mentioned previous after the first session that you wanted to discuss briefly the timing experiment. Do you still want to do that? Do you think you have time?
I think we are over.
Okay.
If you want to make one comment on it, that would be great. So.
One comment, please provide the feedback. You will receive a survey after the meeting, and please provide the feedback about what you think about this experiment with the unstructured time. That's one single message.
Thank you. And with that, thank you very much. I know it's Monday, but we will see you in Montreal.
Yeah, that last draft actually is kind of surprising. I don't recall them presenting.
Va bene, prendi la figura, aggiungi l'ho mangiata che c'è a scala, aggiungi solo le slide di ritorno, le frecce di ritorno. Hai dato qualcosa? Sì, quando tu mandavi, io ti ho mandato un'altra slide, dove c'erano 3 slide, una giornata, però avevo inserito la figura, se no non ci sta. Sì. Okay. E le altre 2 se volevamo stare su 2. Qui togli la 4 da 5, tieni la 3 e aggiungi le frecce con i numeri. Quindi tengo la piccola, aggiungi le frecce. Esatto, sì. Il testo dei numeri non ci sta. No, quello lo puoi certo.
I was sitting in the meeting this is the
E adesso sono in giro dopo però